Hi, I'm Connie Whitman, your host, and you're listening to Enlightenment of Change on webtalkradio.net. As always, I love that you're joining us this week. So my motivational quote today is actually by one of my all-time favorite people on this earth, Ellen DeGeneres. And Ellen says, "The only thing that scares me more than space aliens is the idea that there aren't any space aliens. We can't be the best that creation has to offer. I pray we're not all there is. If so, we're in big trouble." Now, do you believe in time travel, extraterrestrials, and all of those other types of topics? And do you feel the evolution of human consciousness changing every day in our media? I sure feel it. And is the climate change hurting our environmental balances? And what do all of these hot topics and maybe even strange topics have in common? Well, her name is Hillary Raimo, and Hillary is the link between all of those interesting topics. Hillary's my guest, and she's taken 13 years and 700 plus hours of radio shows and has written an awesome 20 chapter book called The Hillary Raimo Show Transcripts. She's had many thought-provoking, belief-changing, breathtaking, mind-bending conversations with some of the most important newsmakers, risk-takers, and earth-shakers, and groundbreakers on the planet, and turned all of that awesome information into a book. Now, Hillary's background is actually in business psychology, real estate, and insurance, and she's bridged the healing arts throughout her traditional training. Now, as a Reiki master teacher and I hope I say this right, Yusui and Karuna Reiki, thank you, a non-denominational ordained minister, author of 3 books, and longtime well-known alternative media radio host. Hillary is also an award-winning photographer and artist, extremely creative, as her love for the creative process expanded over her years on the air. Hillary guided, mentored, and coached new radio voices as she helped people seeking to bring their voices and viewpoints into the world. Hillary has led groups to Egypt and Sedona, as well as traveled the world photographing landscapes. Her favorite being the old growth forest in Ireland and British Columbia. Whoo! Long intro. Thank you so much for being on the show, Hillary, and sharing your time with us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, Connie. Looking forward to the conversation, actually.
I am too. Now, I did read your book, and it was very interesting. Those 20 chapters had very interesting topics and discussions, again, with these brilliant minds that you've interviewed over the years. So now, my first question is, how did you choose the 20 conversations in the book based on that, 700 hours of recording that you had?
Sure. Well, let me tell you, first of all, it was a very difficult thing to do because I've loved all my guests over the years. And I always felt that every conversation that I had on the air was worthy of an audience and felt that the information was valuable. So the first thing I did when I went through all the content that I had produced over the course of a decade was to think about what was going on today and take a look around at the collective platform to see, well, what's on everybody's mind? Where is the general energies? And as a Reiki master teacher, it's very easy for me to do with a background in healing arts to take a look at what's going on in the macro field and how it relates to the micro field of each person individually, perhaps, or our own little cosmic orbits as we go about our daily lives. So one of the things that I found very useful and important was technology. The progression of technology and consciousness was kind of where I started. And then I took a look at the shows that I had done over the years and which ones were my most favorite, the most downloaded, the most popular. And then I also took a look at the ones that weren't perhaps as popular, but just as needed. Perhaps the authors weren't as well known. They didn't have as big of platforms as other authors had, but needed to have their stories told, and their work was very important and valid. And because we've seemed to get into this real interesting place where we validate people's credibility based on their followings. And I don't agree with that, and I never have agreed with that. So when I chose my guests over the years, I would take a look at their content and never their popularity, because I even interviewed a lot of people before they even became celebrity-like types or became very well known. So some of those interviews are really valuable because before people get to that place, they tend to talk a little more freely. They tend to share, and their dynamic is different than when they, have 6 billion people following them around and the egos grow to fit that. So the conversations that helped these modern day relevant topics are in this book, and they are based on technology, time travel, ETs. The Disclosure Project is still very much at work, and everybody's still talking about UFOs and ETs and cosmic consciousness. So it made a lot of sense to add those some of those transcripts in there with some of the more well-known people who've done a lot of work to reveal that. David Lewis Anderson may not be as well known as some of the other ones, but he was doing the circuit lecture around 2010 when I interviewed him. And his private business, his private company, was doing a lot of work in revealing how data travels back in time. So I found that really relevant back then at 2012, and now I look at 2018, and I'm looking around 2017 actually when this was put together, and I'm thinking, with all the data collection going on, could it be that his theories and work, which by the way were private company when I interviewed him, but went into the government sector shortly after, and he's disappeared off of the lecture circuit. Yeah. So I thought, wow, we have all this data collection going on. Are we sending stuff back in time? So I felt like his transcript, his show, the information that he gave out was really relevant and created a really interesting conversation, don't you think?
Absolutely. And all of the topics, again, the 20 chapters, all the different people you had on and the different topics, again, extraterrestrial technology, data collection, all that. How can people use your book, do you think, with some of the issues that we're experiencing now? Or personally experiencing now?
Oh, yeah. So the relevancy also comes with the presentation of the topics. So from chapter 1 to chapter 20, there's a very intentional layout and progression of information. So if the reader goes from page 1 to the last page, they'll be able to hopefully see the progression of information as they read through it and be able to put their own dots together and see a pattern of progression that is interesting, maybe a little disturbing, and also hopefully encourages readers to go out and take a look at these topics, because what we're seeing now is a clampdown on alternative perspectives and alternative information. And what that means is, well, unless it's the official story coming from official leadership, then it's a nutcase conspiracy, and you better just throw it out because you're going to be shamed and really looked at kind of funny, just like they used to shame UFO experiencers or ET experiencers, or anytime people would bring up the subject of ETs and UFOs, there was a very clinical protocol for kind of, mocking them, laughing at them, and black sheeping them out of the mainstream conversation. I think that's changed a lot because of alternative media, because people can make their own shows and interview their own people and get this information out there, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of content. I think we're headed to a very precarious place where content is going to be extremely censored, removed from the internet. So I hope that the book actually preserves the information that so many legitimate people have worked very hard to get out there. And I think Alex Jones, I hope we'll get into this shortly, for a little bit anyway. I know we don't have a lot of time, but Alex Jones was, at the time when I was on the air, one of the larger platforms. And he did a lot of rah-rah anti-government stuff, which now I think is being used. He had Trump come on, of course, at the beginning of his campaign. And Trump spoke to millions and millions of listeners, the anti-government rhetoric. And, they jumped on the bandwagon, free the New World Order. All of this was topics being discussed by people like myself and you. I mean, you've only been doing it for 4 years. But back when I was doing this, there was lots of people talking about New World Order, Illuminati, government conspiracy, all that kind of stuff, okay? But they were also talking about corporate politics, whistleblowing technology. Look at the Edward Snowden years. There's a chapter in my book that discusses the Edward Snowden years with Wayne Madsen. And we have a really interesting picture that starts to come out if you really take a look at what's going on in just the presentation of information, and how now the crackdown is happening to remove the content, close people's minds back down, and make them very afraid to go into the kind of information that so many of us have been talking about for so many years. And hopefully this book will be a testament to that.
Well, it's interesting. And I think it was in your book that you said, like, what's going on in our politics today, that they're screaming louder and louder at each other, but they're screaming louder and louder because they're afraid that they're actually losing control of controlling our minds in the media and all these things. So, you know, when you're backed up against the wall, right, as humans, what do? We we retaliate. So it's kind of interesting. Now I have an interesting question. How has all of those experiences over the 13 years for you, interviewing these really interesting people on these truly diverse and like you said, sometimes conspiracy theory topics, how has it molded your perspective or changed your perspective over time?
Well, one of the things I realized very quickly was that my perspective is unique and unusual compared to most people's
yes.
perspective, because I have a very distinctly different life experience than most people. And I would include other people like myself who've done similar shows for long runs and have talked about similar material. Because you can't research and go into this kind of material and not have it change you. And you can't read the books of some of my guests and not have that information change you. And at the very least, it changes your perspective, which changes everything really, right? So it's all how we see things. And what I see going on now in the larger collective energies and macro scene is this intense energy flying around, pointing fingers, forcing people to take sides, or so it would seem, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So perhaps this really isn't happening the way we think it's happening, because we're just watching it happen via media, any kind of video, audio. All this stuff is produced and edited, and content is manipulated that way and then presented to the public. So we don't usually think about that. Most people don't. I do, because I've been in the business, because I know what it means to edit files and go through shows and sound bites and put things together and that sort. So I have that background and behind the scenes stuff. I think people have become a little naive in how media can really change people's perspectives. So what happens when you have a presidential election that can't necessarily be manipulated anymore by the old ways of manipulating things, because the internet has allowed so much opening of consciousness, opening of opinion, opening of perspective, connection. All of this has become so very important. You know, social media is relatively new. It only really came out within the last decade or so. Yeah. I was on the air actually when it first started to roll out. Facebook first started to roll out. Social media really didn't become too popular, with the exception, I think it came out, I want to say like 2005, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there, okay? And I was right in the middle of my show, bringing people online. So it was a fantastic way to spread the information. You could get online, you could share it, you can tweet it, you can do all this stuff, you can build your following. People that maybe might not necessarily know who you are, learn who your information is, all this stuff, right? That was a real problem, because it also allowed people like Alex Jones, myself, other people along those lines to get this information out and to sway opinions. And what happened is it became impossible to work the political angles as they're usually worked. Politics only really work when people don't know other options. They only know one candidate or two candidates, or one perspective or two perspectives on something. But when you present an alternative perspective, for example, 9/11 is a huge topic for people. And when you start talking about alternative theories about what happened on 9/11, you're talking about conspiracy, right? Technically. But you're not really talking about conspiracy. You're talking about alternative ways of perhaps other than the official story. And we all know how hard our leadership has worked in presenting the official story on 9/11 and shaming everybody else who thinks otherwise. And
I have a question about that. In the book, you gave a great website. The doctor, her name is escaping me, but she's the forensic scientist who, as the reports were coming out about the plane hitting and how the layers of the floors collapsed on top of each other, and she had some amazing video that she breaks down. If you go to that website that was in your book that you give, and she talks to exactly what you're viewing, and this we all will remember the video. I remember watching it live when it was happening, and she talks about how what was really happening as a forensic scientist. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because that was really fascinating. And the other thing I just want to comment on, in the book, you were extremely respectful that you weren't sharing something to be disrespectful to the people who passed in that horrific situation, but that what is the truth and what are we being fed? And here you have this brilliant forensic scientist who could talk through the actual live video that we all saw. Can you just talk about that for a minute? Because it was fascinating. It was fascinating.
Yeah. Dr. Judy Wood.
That was it.
And Dr. Judy Wood has an incredibly amazing background in her credentials and what she specializes in. There's no taking that away from her.
No.
She's not the best public speaker, but she is a fantastic expert and eyewitness to the realities of the structural fall and the physics that happened on the site. I was so impressed by her work that I put both of her transcripts into this book back to back, because I felt like we really need to listen to this woman talk about something, because if you then go on to Dr. Carol Rosen's transcript in my book, she talks about space weapons being built in space, satellite weaponry, GPS technology, things of that sort. That, let's face it, none of us really know what's going up there unless we're in the industries or we're a whistleblower to that extent, right? So what I wanted to do was bring Dr. Wood's work in, show how legitimate her research really is. And I hope everybody searches her name and goes and looks at her website, because
brilliant.
She self-funded a very well done book, because nobody else would publish it, because that's what happens in the publishing world. If they don't like your topics or you're talking about things that it's a little bit too much out there or alternative information, they won't publish your book. So she went to China and published her book. And it's an expensive book, but it's worth every single penny. And I've actually bought copies for people to read because I felt so moved. My own son even read it when he was a teenager, and was just so moved by the book that, he actually came to me and said, "Hey, Mom, this is an amazing book." So I can't go into all of her research because it's so technical and
yes.
It's so really, really what she does, and I'm not that. So it's hard for me to, relay and regurgitate what she says. But her basic premise was that there was severe and extreme amounts of evidence at the 9/11 site that showed a different physics was being used. Okay, there was some kind of energy on site that was not explained by the technology that's publicly available to all of us lay people, right? We should, and most of us wouldn't even notice. We wouldn't even have noticed. We don't have the credentials she has. We would have overlooked it. We would not have known really that, what do holes in metal really mean? What does dustification really mean?
Absolutely.
What does it mean when you see steel beams turn to dust? And I mean, none of us would have even noticed that mostly.
Nope.
And you're certainly not going to see that reported in the mainstream media, and you're not going to see it discussed by the official researchers or the official story. So Dr. Judy Wood brings us an alternative perspective based on facts, research, credible expert opinion, and she offers it. Now she did a couple shows, and she did the show circuit for a few years after a lot of people became familiar with her work. Some people believed it, some people didn't believe it. I don't know how you can't believe it, because if you really do read the book and see where her background comes from, you can't dismiss it. It's very difficult to dismiss what she presents from even a common sense perspective for a person who doesn't have.
Yeah. She and the video, I think it was about an hour long, maybe a little bit longer. But you sit there, and again, she has the video, and then she talks to it. What you were saying, the dustification and stuff. I had never heard of that theory before, her perspective from a scientific point of view. And you're absolutely right. It was interesting because as I was watching her video, I was like, I remember that footage. Never thought what she was saying. Now I saw it clearly in her video as she was commenting as it was happening. Never would have noticed it before because I'm not a scientist, all right, a forensic scientist, that I would know the theories of physics and all of those things. Now, interesting, you commented before about the internet a little bit. Do you think that the internet has become controlled and monetized? Like, is that...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you know that 5G technology, which is being rolled out with, it actually has been moved up to 2019 to be completely installed, but 5G technology runs on the same frequency, the same EMF frequency that the Pentagon uses for crowd control. So also one other thing that's very interesting about 5G technology is the wavelengths can travel through everything, including your walls, your body, your mind, everywhere you're at, nature. And we haven't done enough, in my opinion, we have not done enough studies to really show an offset to the negative aspects of this technology. We're just rolling with it, saying, oh, great, I can connect faster. I can play my YouTube videos faster. I can search things faster. Great, but at what cost are we putting this technology into place? Now, where I live in upstate New York, they have put in these gigantic poles. The old power lines that used to be up were bad enough. Well, these things actually make those old power lines look like little dwarf figures, and they are probably about, gosh, I'd have to say 10 times bigger than these other poles.
Yes.
And wires are going across the whole state, and it's all being done by private industry. The government isn't doing it. They're hiring private industry to do it, so they don't have to disclose the health effects. We already know the health effects from the other power lines, and now we have these ginormous power lines going up in place of them to put this 5G technology into place across our country. I have a very opinionated perspective on this. Because of the things that I have talked about over my radio career, because of the topics I've discussed, because of the books I've read to get ready for my shows and to properly interview my guests, I have been exposed. I guess I've self-educated myself on a lot of these topics that most people don't even have the time to go into a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
So what I see happening is a natural codependence on cell phones building up over the last decade. We really have done a big, huge push to make people completely dependent on cell phones. We have our email, we have our social media, we have our personal lives, we have our businesses all connected in one little handheld device, right? This little guy here is really not too far away at all given times, right? But when you realize that the waves that are coming out of your handheld devices or your iPads or your laptops or all of these things we use now to do our work and to connect our lives is actually damaging a lot around you and within you and changing the human mind and what are the repercussions of this, and how come we don't take a deeper look at the technology that is just being blindly put into place by private industry and government industry? Of course it's controlled.
Yeah, and I'm cracking up as you say this. My husband and I recently went to Canada for he's Canadian, and we had family up there who we celebrated a 90th birthday for his aunt. It was wonderful. And we're driving from New Jersey. I'm in Jersey all the way up, and we went through Pennsylvania and around to get to Canada and in Ontario. the power lines that you're talking about, my husband laughs because I see him and I go, it's cancer. They're projecting cancer. They're projecting illnesses. And he laughs at me. He's like, why do you get so riled? And I said, because we're allowing it. And these towers are just so bad. Like, really, do we need faster phones? And the other concern, it was funny you're saying that because I have children. I have a 22 and a 19-year-old, 2 boys. Hillary, they are on their devices all the time. And then now they're in college, they're on their computers all the time. They don't get a break from the technology, and that concerns me. Long term, what is going to be the health effect to humans, 20 years from now? Even if it doesn't affect you and I, how about our kids, our grandkids, and maybe even our great-grandkids? So all of these technologies, they really do freak me out. It's funny that you're mentioning the towers, these huge high energy, whatever they're called, but the output is... I can't stand them, and I think we recently moved, and that was one of I'm like, oh no, we can't move here. Those towers are like a mile away. That's too close for me, and I don't know why the fear is there, but it's an intuitive thing for me. But that you mentioned it, this technology is really freaking me out to a large extent because we don't know the long-term repercussions, right?
Well, they don't care about the health repercussions are not a concern to the companies. The agenda goes a little darker than that. And I want to just say before I start talking about this, because I have a healing arts background, yes. I am sensitive to people being afraid of this information. And so it's counted on that most people will be afraid of this information and won't go looking. Okay. Absolutely. It's counted on that people who can and do have the power to change these things will stick their heads in the sand and run away from it and say, oh my gosh, I can't talk about that. It's too dark. It's too negative, blah, blah, blah. Right? Well, after it's been all put into place and we realize what it really is, it's going to be too late to really do anything about it. And then it's just going to become a matter of offsetting the energy that we're going to be inundated with.
Absolutely.
In China, they have released an interesting thing. They have this digital life over in China that now has just connected everything. And people have what's called a social credit score. And this social credit score is based on what other people think of you, what other people have reported about you, what your real credit score is, how much debt you have. A lot of different dynamics go into it. But what's mostly putting into place is a massive digital infrastructure that creates a surveillance type society, meaning that you walk down the street and all the cameras that you see now all over, in the name of terrorism and in the name of school shootings and in the name of all of these things that have caused us to be in need of constant surveillance, right? We've been sold that as a package. We've been told that we need this. We've been sold it as a convenience. But what it really does, every time you walk through an airport and you go through the body scanner, your body, your entire landscape of your body is digitally recorded. Your face is digitally recorded. And kids growing up with this technology don't know any different. They've already grown up into it. Yep. They've accepted it. It's been mainstreamed into their existence. And I'm probably, like you and others, part of the last generations that come from, hey, growing up in nature, not having a cell phone, not being digitally dependent on anything. What a concept, right? But now it's outdated and it's considered, unuseful in today's modern world. I have to disagree with that. And there's a lot of reasons I disagree with that. But most importantly, we're following China and the UK's kind of example of a complete digital surveillance government. And so I see it being set up. I've traveled to these places. I've seen it firsthand. I've talked to people who are experts in it. I've listened to their research. I've read their research. I've watched the headlines change over the years. That's what I do. It's like ingrained in me as a radio host, right? I watch what happens on the collective platform because it tells a story. And if you can listen to the story properly and see the story properly without getting caught up into your emotional landscape or triggered by the political propaganda, you can see something really interesting happening. Now, a couple of days ago, there was a summit being held down in New York City, but global leadership was there to discuss the future of the digital age, basically. And I caught an interesting clip, just happened to turn it on in time, and sometimes I think this is divine guidance. You turn on these things and happen to see them. Oh, what a coincidence, right? And they were talking about how the global leaders, the European Union global heads, were discussing with private tech companies how to police the social media platforms for them. So we're looking at the implementation of algorithms. You type something innocently in your post, or what you're thinking, or you post a picture, or you rah, 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 I'm so angry about this, or hey, pay attention to this. The algorithms will sort you out and itemize you out for people in leadership who are looking for the voices that are really talking about the true stuff, the things that we really need to be paying attention to, in order to bring it to the greater awareness of the public, to say, hey, if you knew that putting up these big, huge polls was going to kill you in 5 years, would you care?
Absolutely.
Hey, if you knew your cell phone was great for connecting to people, but also, projecting an EMF wave into your brain to change your brain chemistry, would you be so excited to use it? Would you be so quick to go buy your 5-year-old one? Would you want to put them into your teaching lesson for kindergarten? I mean, that's what's happening. We are instituting a digital age dependency that will allow 5G technology to really do its ultimate agenda, which is to basically infiltrate everything so a Wi-Fi signal can be connected to everything, which can be manipulated and hacked. Now that sounds really scary, right? People are going, oh my God, I'm so afraid of this. What do I do? She's talking about bad things. She's a horrible person, right?
Absolutely.
She's awful. No, I think fear, not being afraid, is about being able to talk about this stuff. Okay, we talk about fear. We talk about don't be afraid, don't get pulled in. Well, it's great and it's true, but not to the point where we're completely unable to have any other kind of discussion about it, or to put it on the table and say, hey, what do we think about this? What should we do, really? Fear is a tactic. Fear can be used as a tool. Fear can be manipulated. We grew as human species. It was one thing to be afraid while walking through the woods that a bear is coming, right? That's real life fear. Yep. That's fear for your life. That's run. But we have become so safe in our settings, pretty much for the most part, that fear now is really mostly psychological. So psychological fear is much different and much easier to manipulate than instinctual survival fear.
I have to make you laugh. My dad is an immigrant from Italy. He was 19, he came here. He's now 88, right? And recently, he hates the social media, hates Facebook. We were talking about his marinara sauce, and my cousins asked for the recipe, and he's like, they better not put it on the Facebook. So again, he clearly doesn't understand it fully. But here's the interesting thing. Recently he said, if the electricity, the internet, the mobile Wi-Fi signal, he goes, if all of that goes down, we're all dead. Like, what are you talking about? He goes, the United States will not be able to survive if they can't turn on their water, if they can't Google a map of how to get from point A to point B. If there's a bridge that collapses, what do I do now? I don't have Google. Nobody has a map anymore. He said, I'm telling you, we'll all starve to death and we will all die because nobody's going to know what to do. There will be mass chaos. And that's really what you're describing. We've become so dependent on these tools, right? The phone as a tool. And how many times do you Google where you're going? We do it. We all do it, right?
Yeah. See, here's the antidote to that. Okay. I mean, I recently came back from the high peaks Adirondacks. I was up there for a retreat.
Awesome.
And it's one of the least light polluted areas in the northeastern United States. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I noticed when I was up there was, wow, how quiet and how still everything was out in the woods. It was amazing. And nature was so much different. The colors were brighter.
Absolutely.
There were so many differences. And then when I came back to upstate New York, Albany area where I live, I realized instantly the colors were muted. Nature was showing me distress. That's what I keep seeing in the trees. We have famous leaf color change here, as you know. You live in New York City, right?
Yes.
And people travel from all over the world to come see our leaf change. Yep. And the color, I've lived here for 45 years, and the colors are different this year. There's something going on in our environment that is giving us a lot of signs and a lot of clues that things are going on, and we need to be able to pay attention better, and we can't do it when our face is buried in our phones.
You're right.
We cannot make an artificial frequency that nature emanates naturally. We just can't reproduce it. It's not the same thing as being out in the woods or being outside by yourself. And I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you walk 10 feet in or you walk 10 miles in. It doesn't matter. Whatever your relationship is with nature, it's a vital frequency. So we can do it with meditation. We can do it with making conscious disconnection time, teaching our kids to not grow up dependent on it. Don't give the kids cell phones. It's really bad for the development of their brain. It can give, young girls and young men carry it around in their back pocket, which emanates radiation through their ovaries, and sperm counts are low. So, there's a lot of good reasons to say no. And I think if we just became more educated in the realities of the technology that we're dealing with, because I have these conversations a lot, and people are like, what? I don't even understand what you're talking about. I've never heard anything about that. You must be a conspiracy theorist. And then they're just glaze over and they shut down because they've already discredited you in their head. I can promise you that is an agenda that our leadership is taking very seriously, and they're using Alex Jones as an example, and they're going to go after other people who talk about these subjects even in a more rational way, because Alex is very, high energy, rah, 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 and not everybody is like that. And there's been a lot of really good people in the industry of alternative media who have worked really hard to be diligent in their research and to give the information to the public in a way that's really responsible.
Absolutely. We're out of time, Hillary, but this is fascinating. And the book, honestly, was fascinating. And just, the videos that the websites that you include as well, for people to formulate their own opinion and hear what these experts are saying that has been hidden from us, I think is real important. And with the digital stuff, I agree 1,000%. It scares the crap out of me because these phones are killing us, one little piece at a time. So thank you so much for your insight and change, right? The show is Enlightenment of Change. It's about change. Change might not always be such a great thing with all of this technology, so we should educate ourselves, excuse me, and become more mindful. Guys, I highly recommend you buy Hillary's book. It's the Hillary Raimo Show Transcripts, and they can get it on
Amazon UK, Barnes & Noble, and Lulu.com.
So check it out. And also visit Hillary's website. It's Hillary Raimo, and Raimo is RAIMO.com. I will post it on the Web Talk Radio Enlightenment of Change platform so you guys can find Hillary and check out her info. Fascinating book, Hillary. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on. A real pleasure, and just definitely an interesting conversation. I enjoy, and I look forward to all the things that you're, working on and yet to come into focus for us. So thank you so much. I hope you guys will join me weekly as we question, build, and discover together how to grow and challenge ourselves so we can all embrace change, hopefully good change, and realize that it's possible and easier than we think. And I hope today helped you begin to discover alternatives that we should start looking at for ourselves so we can think more clearly. Thank you again, Hillary, for being a great guest. You guys, you've been listening to Enlightenment of Change with me, your host, Connie Whitman, on webtalkradio.net. I wish you all an inspired week, and go and investigate some of the things Hillary and I talked about today. Thanks, everybody.